Africa is a continent of immense paradox, you know? It holds a vast and staggering amount of the world's natural resources. Beneath its diverse landscapes lie treasures that power global industries and, well, adorn people across the planet. From the shimmering diamonds of Botswana to the rich cocoa fields of Côte d'Ivoire, its wealth is undeniable. This natural endowment should, in theory, translate into widespread prosperity for its people. It should fund world-class schools, state-of-the-art hospitals, and modern infrastructure. The reality, however, presents a starkly different and more complicated picture for many of its nations. This is the fundamental contradiction that has defined Africa's post-colonial journey. Despite this incredible natural wealth, many African nations continue to face significant economic challenges. Poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment persist across large parts of the continent. The question that echoes through the halls of economic forums and in the villages of the Sahel is a simple yet profound one. Why? Why does a continent so rich in resources remain, in many respects, so poor in distributed wealth? The disconnect between resource abundance and the economic well-being of the average citizen is a puzzle that has perplexed policymakers and citizens alike for decades. The Democratic Republic of Congo holds more than half of the world's cobalt used in batteries for electric cars and smartphones. South Africa, Botswana, vast diamond reserves supplying a large part of the global market. Zambia, the DRC, form the heart of the copper belt, copper essential for electrical wiring and construction worldwide. Nigeria, Angola, top oil producers with offshore reserves fueling global economies. Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana together produce over 60% of the world's cocoa. Cocoa, the primary ingredient in chocolate. Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee and a top producer of high-quality Arabica. Tourism creates jobs and brings in foreign currency. The Congo Basin and other vast forests are the world's second-largest tropical rainforest and regulate the global climate. Managed sustainably, these natural assets offer a development path beyond finite extraction, providing renewable income and preserving heritage for future generations. The narrative of resource curse is often invoked to explain this situation. This idea suggests that countries with abundant natural resources tend to have less economic growth and worse development outcomes than countries with fewer resources. But this is not an inevitable destiny, it's a result of specific policies, historical contexts, and institutional failures. To truly understand Africa's economic story, we must move beyond simplistic labels. We need to dissect the mechanics of resource extraction, the flow of capital, the role of governments, and the influence of international partners. Only by doing so can we reveal the real reasons behind the continent's enduring economic struggles and identify the keys to unlocking its true potential. To understand Africa's present economic state, we must first look to its past. The colonial period, late 19th century to the mid-20th century, fundamentally reshaped the continent's economy. European powers didn't colonize to develop. They came to extract resources. The primary objective was a steady supply of raw materials like rubber, cotton, minerals, timber to fuel factories in Europe. This extractive model created one-way flows of wealth to the metropole. Colonial administrators built infrastructure, but it was designed for a single purpose: extraction. Railways, roads, not to connect communities but to link inland resources directly to coastal ports. From these ports, raw materials were shipped to Europe. Disconnected economic corridors formed instead of integrated national networks. It was often easier to move goods from a mine in the interior to London, to Paris than to a neighboring African city. A legacy that still hampers regional trade today. The colonial system suppressed local industries and entrepreneurship. African economies were forced into primary commodity production. They were discouraged from processing their own raw materials. For instance, export raw cotton, import finished textiles. The dependency model prevented a diversified industrial base. It locked nations at the bottom of the value chain. Many African nations lacked capital, technology, infrastructure to build the factories needed for this processing. Independence did not automatically end the extractive economic model established during the colonial era. In many ways, the system simply continued under new management, sometimes referred to as neo-colonialism. African nations continued to be primary exporters of raw, unprocessed commodities to industrialized nations. The global economic architecture was already set. Newly independent countries with non-diversified economies had very little leverage. They were, and often still are, price takers in markets where export prices are volatile and often decline over time. Commodity prices are notoriously unstable. A country dependent on oil can see its national budget swing wildly based on global supply and demand. This volatility makes long-term economic planning incredibly difficult. When prices are high, governments embark on ambitious spending projects. When prices crash, projects are abandoned and countries can be plunged into debt crises. Real wealth isn't from extraction, it's from processing and transforming resources into finished goods. Finished chocolate bars versus raw cocoa beans. Tariff rules in developed countries penalize processed African goods while raw materials enter with low or no tariffs, disincentivizing industrialization. Africa supplies raw materials, but the jobs, profits, and economic multipliers are realized elsewhere. A smartphone in Europe may contain cobalt from the DRC, yet most value is created in design, manufacturing, and marketing outside Africa. The result, a disproportionately small share of wealth flows back to the continent, perpetuating dependency and limiting broad-based development and job creation for a growing population. While historical and external factors play a crucial role, Africa's economic challenges are also, profoundly shaped by internal issues, chief among them being governance and corruption. In many resource-rich nations, the revenues generated from minerals or oil just don't benefit the wider population. Instead, these funds are often mismanaged or diverted into the private accounts of a small, powerful elite. This siphoning of public wealth is a direct barrier to development. Money that should be invested in schools, healthcare, and roads instead fuels lavish lifestyles for a few, creating deep social and economic inequalities that can lead to instability. Poor governance shows itself in a lack of transparency and accountability. Contracts for the extraction of natural resources are often negotiated in secret, without public scrutiny. The terms of these deals may heavily favor the foreign corporation over the host country. Without transparent systems to track revenue and spending, it becomes easy for funds to disappear. In some cases, national resource wealth is treated as a personal piggy bank by those in power. This environment discourages responsible investment and erodes public trust, creating a vicious cycle of poverty and political disenfranchisement. The consequences of this corruption are devastating. It starves the public sector of the funds it needs to function. Hospitals lack basic medicines, schools are without books, and infrastructure just crumbles from neglect. It also distorts the economy. When success depends on political connections rather than innovation and hard work, it stifles entrepreneurship. Businesses are forced to pay bribes to get permits or clear goods from ports, increasing the cost of doing business and making it impossible for small, honest enterprises to compete. A major practical barrier to Africa's economic development is its significant infrastructure deficit. Infrastructure, you see, refers to the fundamental physical systems of a country. Roads, railways, ports, and reliable electricity. These systems, they're really the arteries of an economy, allowing goods, people, and information to move efficiently. But in many parts of Africa, these arteries are either clogged or, entirely missing. A lack of paved roads makes it difficult and expensive for farmers to transport their produce to markets, which leads to spoilage and lost income. This, in turn, isolates rural communities and prevents them from participating fully in the national economy. The energy sector is another critical area of deficit. Access to reliable and affordable electricity is a prerequisite for industrialization and modern life. But unfortunately, a large portion of the African population lives without it. Businesses are often forced to rely on expensive and polluting diesel generators, which increases their operating costs and makes their products less competitive. Without a stable power grid, it's nearly impossible to run factories, operate modern hospitals, or even provide quality education. The African Development Bank estimates the continent's infrastructure financing needs to be well over $100 billion per year, far exceeding what national governments or traditional aid can provide. This creates a significant challenge, but also an opportunity for private investment and innovative financing models. Africa's story is far from written, and you can help shape its next chapter. If you found this video insightful, please subscribe and share it with friends. Every conversation sparked by knowledge brings us one step closer to a brighter, more connected future for the continent. Curious to learn more or get involved? Check the links in the description for resources and organizations making a difference. Together, we can amplify Africa's voice and support the journey toward lasting prosperity. Don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe, share, and join us as we continue to explore the path forward. Beyond internal challenges, the structure of the global trading system itself often places African nations at a disadvantage. The rules of international trade have largely been written by developed nations and can sometimes work against the interests of poorer countries. One significant issue is agricultural subsidies in Europe and the United States. Wealthy nations often provide massive financial support to their own farmers. This allows them to produce crops like cotton and sugar at artificially low costs and export them cheaply, flooding global markets. African farmers who don't receive such subsidies can't compete with these artificially low prices. This unfair competition devastates African agriculture, the backbone of many economies and the primary source of livelihood for a majority of the population. When a West African cotton farmer has to compete with subsidized American cotton, they're competing not just with another farmer, but with the United States Treasury. This can drive local farmers out of business, increase rural poverty, and turn countries that should be self-sufficient into net importers of food. These trade-distorting subsidies are a major hypocrisy in the global system, where poor countries are often told to embrace free markets while rich countries protect their own sectors. Another challenge lies in what are known as tariff escalation structures. For example, raw coffee beans might enter the European Union duty-free. Roasted coffee faces a significant tariff. Instant coffee faces a significant tariff. This policy creates a strong disincentive for African countries to develop their own processing industries. It effectively traps them at the bottom of the value chain, forcing them to continue exporting raw commodities while the higher value processing jobs remain in the developed world. Despite the formidable challenges, the narrative of Africa is not one of uniform stagnation. Botswana stands as a classic example. At independence, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. However, the discovery of diamonds was managed with remarkable prudence and foresight, strong institutions, democratic governance, and a long-term vision. The government negotiated fair deals with mining companies, ensuring the nation received a substantial share of the revenue. Crucially, these diamond revenues were then reinvested into public services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The country established a sovereign wealth fund to save money for future generations and to stabilize the budget against diamond price volatility. This prudent management transformed Botswana into one of Africa's most stable and prosperous middle-income countries. Rwanda, a country with few natural resources and a tragic history, has achieved remarkable economic growth over the past 2 decades. Good governance, zero tolerance for corruption, strategic investments in technology and services. The government has made it easier to do business, attracting investment and fostering a culture of entrepreneurship. In the realm of trade, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, represents a monumental step forward. Launched in 2019, this agreement aims to create a single market for goods and services across the continent. By reducing tariffs and other barriers to trade between African nations, AFCFTA has the potential to supercharge intra-African commerce. This could help countries diversify their economies away from commodity dependence, build regional value chains, and create a market of over 1 billion people. It's a bold, African-led initiative designed to rewrite the continent's economic story from one of extraction to one of integration and shared prosperity. The story of Africa's wealth is a complex tapestry woven with threads of immense potential and persistent challenges. The continent's vast endowment of natural resources, minerals, oil, fertile lands. Yet this wealth has not translated into widespread prosperity. The reasons, as we've seen, are not simple. They're rooted in a history of colonial extraction that designed economies for external benefit, a model that's proven stubbornly difficult to dismantle. This historical legacy is compounded by modern-day challenges. Internally, the corrosive effects of corruption and weak governance divert public funds desperately needed for development. A crippling deficit in infrastructure, roads, electricity, acts as a physical brake on economic activity, isolating communities and hindering industrialization. Externally, an often unfavorable global trade system with its subsidies and tariff structures creates an uneven playing field that makes it difficult to climb the value chain and escape the trap of commodity dependence. However, the future is not predetermined. The path forward requires a multi-pronged approach that addresses these challenges head-on. First, African governments must double down on strengthening institutions, promoting transparency, and fighting corruption. The examples of countries like Botswana show that this is not an impossible dream. Second, There must be a massive strategic push to invest in infrastructure, creating the networks that will connect markets, power industries, and unlock the continent's economic potential, with initiatives like the AFCFTA leading the way. Finally, the international community has a role to play in reforming the global trade system to make it fairer. But ultimately, Africa's destiny lies in its own hands. The continent must focus on adding value to its own resources, fostering entrepreneurship, and investing in its greatest asset, its young, dynamic population. By building robust institutions, investing in infrastructure, investing in people, and promoting regional integration, African nations can break the old cycles of extraction. They can begin to forge a new path, where the continent's natural wealth translates into a tangible, prosperous, and sustainable future for all its citizens. Africa's journey is not one to be watched from the sidelines, it's a story that calls for participation. If you believe in a future where Africa's wealth lifts all its people, where hope outshines hardship, then you have a part to play. Subscribe to our channel to stay informed and inspired by stories of progress and possibility. Share this video to spark conversations that challenge old narratives and ignite new ideas. And if you can, support organizations and initiatives that empower local entrepreneurs, invest in education, drive sustainable development across the continent. Together we can help shape a future where Africa's sun rises on opportunity, unity,